Hello Year 11. I wanted to put this video together to introduce you to today's lesson, to talk you through some of the tasks you're going to be doing and hopefully help you understand it just that little bit better. Now, if you notice the title today, we're going to be looking at global water supplies. And you might be thinking that we've already done this, we've already looked at water, and we have, but the difference here is global. Now, this whole unit on resource management is split into two parts. The first half is where we looked at resources in the UK. So we spent a lesson looking at food resources in the UK and how we use them, where our food comes from. We looked at a lesson about water, so what the water supply and demand is like in different parts of the UK and how we move water around through water transfer schemes. And then we looked at a third lesson about energy, so where our energy comes from, how that's changed over time, and some of the issues and arguments surrounding that. And that's the UK focus in the first half. This second half of the topic starts today, and it's all about water resources around the world. So today we're going to be looking at water supply and water demand, and linked to that, water surplus and water deficit, which are the key words we looked at last time, but we're going to be applying it to the whole world rather than just the UK. And then as we move through the next few lessons, we're going to be looking at some of the issues in parts of the world where they don't have enough water, or they don't have enough water that's clean and safe and available to use. And then we'll be trying to work out how we can help those countries, what we could do to try and improve their water supply, either the quantity of water or the quality of water that they have available. So today we're going to start by recapping some keywords, and then we're going to be looking at some patterns of water availability and water use around the world, and then looking at some facts and figures to help us get our heads around this issue. So first off, if you look at the top of your worksheet, you've got four key terms which we looked at last time when we looked at UK water resources. And I want you to start off by seeing if you can remember what they are. So water supply, water demand, water surplus, and water deficit. Four really, really important key terms that we need to get our heads around, and we need to understand, and we need to know them if we're going to be able to make sense of this lesson and the rest of the unit. So first of all, I want you to pause the video in a minute, and I want you to try, from memory, writing those definitions down. Now, don't worry if you get it wrong. Don't worry if you make a mistake, because in a minute, I'm going to go on to the next slide where I'm going to give you the answers. So just pause your video now and have a go at writing them down. Hopefully now you've restarted it and you've written or had a go at writing down those definitions. And if you look at this slide, the next slide on our PowerPoint, I've got the same definitions I gave you last time. So water supply, it's the amount of water that is available for use by individuals and communities. Water demand, secondly, is the amount of water that is needed to meet the needs of individuals, industry, and communities. Needs or demands, two words you can use interchangeably there. And water surplus happens when there is more water available than is needed to meet demand. And that's also known as water security. So if a country is in water surplus, they have water security. And finally, water deficit, or the opposite, water insecurity, is where there is not enough water available to meet the demand. And obviously that's a concern for countries around the world. It's a real issue that affects millions of people every single day of their lives. So that's a really, really important starting point. Underneath that, you need to contrast physical water scarcity or water insecurity with economic water scarcity. Now, on the next slide, give you a little bit of a helping hand with this. So if you're going to answer that correctly, you can imagine it's like a 3-mark exam question, where contrast is a really important command word. We need to understand what it means. And as I've said at the bottom of the slide here, contrast asks you to point out the differences between two things. So there's no point in just writing two sentences in that box, one about physical water scarcity and one about economic water scarcity. What you've got to do if you're contrasting is link them together and show how they're different. And it sometimes is as simple as just writing whereas, or however, or on the other hand, in the middle of them. So physical water scarcity. You need to think about what that word physical means, which you could also use the word natural, and what that's got to do with water supplies around the world. So water scarcity is where there's not enough water. Think about the types of countries where that might be. and what natural reasons there are for that. And obviously, hopefully, you're going to think about climates for that. Secondly, economic water scarcity. Well, hopefully you know that economic is linked to money. So money factors having to do with a country not having access to clean and safe water. And it might be for countries that have economic water scarcity, it might be that they do have water, but it is not clean or safe enough to drink. So hopefully you're thinking low-income countries or newly emerging economies might be the countries that face economic water scarcity, where they simply can't afford to make the water that they have clean and safe to drink and use. So there's your introduction. Hopefully you can write an answer for that as well. They're your key terms, which we're going to keep going back to again and again as we go through this topic. And we're hopefully ready now to move on to the next part and look at the patterns around the world of water surplus and water deficits. So on your worksheet, you've got two maps. You've got the map on the left-hand side, map A, which is this one on screen here. So there's a colour version for you to use with the key. Now, the key is really important, and we'll come to that in a minute. The second map on your worksheet is all about water stress, and they've categorised each of the countries within one of the four categories. It's not in colour on your sheets, but for the purposes of the task you're going to be doing, we don't actually need to use that map. So we're going to focus on the map that I've put on screen. And what you've got to do first is identify 3 areas of the world on the map where they have a water surplus. So the first thing you need to do is you need to look at the key, and we need to work out which colour or colours we're looking for on the map if we're looking at a water surplus. And you'll see on the key that is at the bottom end of the scale, which if you just jump to conclusions, you might not notice that. Okay, it shows that it's really important to look at the key, especially if you're then using that figure or that resource to answer a question. So once you've identified 3 areas where there's a water surplus with a blue or a green, you'll then need to identify 3 areas that have a water deficit. So opposite end of the scale, again, look at the colours on the key, then look at your map, look where those colours are, and try and identify 3 areas. Now on your worksheet, I've just put areas that could be continents, it could be countries if you can name particular countries there, or it could be parts of continents. For example, you could talk about Northwest Europe or Southeast Asia if you wanted to for part of those answers. So have a think about that, have a look, and again, have a go at writing those down, 3 specific areas for each in your booklet. And below that, you then are asked, are there any patterns? Well, it's a bit of a leading question that there is a pattern as to where water surplus and water deficit is, and what you need to do is describe that pattern. So again, it's another small mark exam question which you could be asked in an exam, where you could be given a figure like this. You're asked to describe the pattern of water surplus and water deficit around the world. And there's 2 ways we could go about this. We could look on a continental level. So you could look at your map, and the big thing that jumps out to me when I look at it is that the 2 continents where mainly there is a water deficit are Africa and Australasia down in the southeast of your map. And that's absolutely fine. So you could talk about continents, or you could talk about latitude. And latitude in geography, hopefully you know what that word means. But if not, latitude is the distance north or south of the equator. And we've looked at our ecosystems. So we've looked at tropical rainforests, and we've looked at deserts already. And hopefully you can remember the latitudes or the locations on the planet of those 2 global ecosystems. Now, generally speaking, we find rainforests around the equator between 30 degrees north and about 30 degrees south. And you should be able to see on your map, if you draw a line roughly where the equator is, that there is a water surplus in those areas there. And then areas of water deficit, generally you're looking at deserts. And again, deserts are found in bands, 2 bands around the world. One about 20 to 30 degrees north of the equator, and the other band 20 to 30 degrees south of the equator. So you could use latitudes in your description of the pattern, looking at water surplus and water deficit. So have a think, have a go at that. Whichever way you do it, it's not wrong, as long as you're describing the general pattern. So we're not just looking at writing a list of countries that are in water surplus. and a list of countries that are in water deficit. So have a go at that. If you want to pause the video and do that now, you can do, and then we will get on with the next part of the task. Okay, moving on. The next question we need to answer is, what is happening to water around the world? What is happening to water use? What is happening to water demand? And how is that leading to water stress? And if you look at the task sheet which I've given you, I'm asking you now to read through the information. We've given you this information because it's important, because it's helpful, and it'll help you with the rest of the tasks which we're going to move on to. So this is a good opportunity to get a highlighter or a coloured pen out and to read through that information. I'm not asking you to write anything down. The one thing I would say, though, is pay careful attention to the top right of this page, where there's a little grey box that says, what is water stress? Now, water stress is another one of those key terms, like water surplus and water deficit, but it's a bit more complicated. And if you read it, water stress takes into account different factors that relate to the availability of water. And it could be about the water supply and the water demand, but it is also about the quality and the accessibility and the availability of that water within an area. So read through that information, and then we'll be moving on to our next task. Okay, over the page, the next bit which we're going to be looking at is this question: why is water consumption? So why is the use of water increasing around the world? And what you've got to do, it says on the task sheet, it says on the slide there, you need to complete the flow diagram, and there's 3 rows to our flow diagram, to explain how economic development, or the development of a country, increases water use. Now, development is an issue which you looked at a little bit back in year 9. It's something we're going to be looking at more as we go through paper 2, as we look at the different units and developments around the world. But development is all about countries improving, making progress, and almost growing their economies from being low-income countries to newly emerging economies, and ultimately the end goal is to become a high-income country, or what we used to call just a developed country. And we've put together this flow diagram to help you work through this. Now, we're not just expecting you to make this up or just know it. If you've read the information on the previous page carefully, there's a box in the middle of the page saying, why is water consumption increasing? And if you read through that, that is going to provide the basis for what we need to use in this flow diagram. Now, I've filled in this row for you. So if you look at the pattern, as countries get richer, citizens of those countries have higher living standards. People have more money, so they have more products that might use more water. Example, dishwashers, washing machines are another example. Most of us have them in our homes, but if you think about low-income countries or newly emerging economies around the world, they're not going to have access to those same products. Well, how is that linking to our water use? Well, each of these items are what we call water-intensive products. So having them and using them increases the amount of water that each person uses on a daily basis. And finally, if that's happening, well, more water is being used, so there's ultimately going to be less water available for use by other people. And that's a really good example for you to use. And what you need to do now is go through, for the second row and the third row, those 4 boxes, using the information we've seen, trying to look at the pattern and trying to answer those questions that we need to look at. So row 2 and row 3, same thing. And if you look at what I've put on screen here, some examples you might want to talk about, which are on that previous page. As a country develops, it develops more industry. So low-income countries, primarily people work in farming, in agriculture. And as a country develops, factories start to be built and they start to produce products rather than just raw materials from farms and from the ground. Well, if you think about that, factories then use water either for cooling machinery or in the production of their products. And so you could use that as an example to fill in your flow diagram. Secondly, as a country develops, it uses more energy. And no matter what source of energy it is, the majority of energy production methods are heavily reliant on water. Sometimes in the production process, other times it's about cooling fluids and machinery, again, that are used in that process. So you could use that. And thirdly and finally, I've put there that as a country develops, it might need more food. And water is key for the production of food, whether that's growing crops, whether that's feeding animals, they're all important. So just pick 2 of those or 2 of your own examples from that previous page and use those to fill in the flow diagram on the sheet. Okay, we're going to move on now, and hopefully it all makes sense what we've done so far. Hopefully, having talked you through some of the different stages, at least helps you to understand what we're expecting you to do here. And to finish off today's lesson, if you turn on to your next page, there's an exam question. And having done the work we've done already, this question really is not that complicated. It's a 6-mark exam question, but if we break it down, the question is asking you 3 different things. So you read the question there, it says, explain how both physical and human factors can influence the availability of water. And if we split that up into 3 parts, we need to make sure that somewhere in our answer, we've talked about physical factors that influence the availability of water, and we've talked about human factors. So that word both is key there. Well, the questions you need to think about and the questions you should be able to answer from what we've done today are those 3 I've put on the screen there in the blue box. So what natural reasons are there that countries have different amounts of water available? And hopefully, again, you think of that word climate and you can talk about how different countries in different parts of the world have different climates and how that then causes them to have more or less water available. Secondly, what human reasons are there that countries have different amounts of water available? And again, that can come down to wealth. Think about our low-income countries or our high-income countries and what the difference is that we've been looking at previously. And thirdly then, what reasons are there that cause water availability to change over time? So the stuff we've just been looking at about the use of water and how water use changes over time, we can talk about that in that section. So what you need to do is you need to take each of those 3 questions and find your answer. It might be worth jotting a little plan, bullet pointed plan down the left-hand side of your sheet. And the command word for this question says explain. So you need to give reasons for the link between that cause and the result it has on how much water there is available. So have a go, plan your answer first, write your answer, and then once you've finished, if you want to have a go, there's a challenge question at the bottom. It really is a challenge question. It's something designed to get you thinking, and it gives you a statement there and asks, to what extent do you agree with that statement? So have a go answering the question. If you look on the final slide of the PowerPoint, there's an example I've put of one way you could start your answer to that question. You don't have to use it, but it's there to help you if you do need it. And that's it for this first lesson of the second half of this unit. So hopefully that helps you to work through it. Once you've done, please do take a picture of your completed work, submit it to the assignment in Edmodo. If you have any questions at all, please send your teacher a message or send us an email and we'll be happy to help you out.